My name's Ellis Granger and I'm 83 years old. People look at me now and see a quiet old man sitting alone on a wooden porch with a cup of black coffee and a heart full of silence. They see the wrinkled hands, the bent back, the soft eyes, but they don't see the fire that still burns behind them. They don't see the things I remember, the things I never said out loud. You see, I wasn't always like this. I was once a husband, a father, a soldier, a mechanic, and, for a short, ugly while, something much darker. What I'm about to tell you ain't easy, but it's the truth. And I reckon I've got just enough time left to tell it before my bones give out completely. It started back in the summer of 1972. I was 30, had a house on the outskirts of Jackson, Mississippi, and was married to the kindest woman God ever made, Clarabelle. She had this smile that could stop traffic and a way of speaking that made even angry men lean in to listen. We had a son, Paulie, just 8 years old, full of questions and bad jokes. That boy could laugh at anything. And I mean anything. I was working at a little auto garage in town, doing tune-ups and oil changes for just about every truck and jalopy within 20 miles. It was honest work, and it paid enough to keep food on the table and gas in the Ford. I didn't want for much, just a quiet life, steady days, and peace. I'd already done my share of noise, serving in Korea when I was barely more than a boy myself. I'd seen enough pain to last a lifetime. But you know what they say. Peace don't last forever. Not when there are men out there who can't stand to see someone else content. There was this man in town named Sheriff Calvin Broyle. Big man, loud voice, always had a cigar in his mouth and a scowl on his face. He'd been sheriff since before I came back from the war, and everyone knew he ran Jackson like it was his own personal fiefdom. He didn't care much for black folks. If I'm being plain, I'd seen him look right past Clarabelle like she didn't exist. Spit on the sidewalk when Paulie tried to wave at him once. I bit my tongue every time, 'cause back then speaking up could cost you more than your pride. It could cost you everything. One night, late July, the heat pressing down like a heavy hand, Paulie and I were out by the garage fixing up an old carburetor. Clarabelle was inside making cornbread. That's when we heard the sirens. Not the fast kind, not like a chase. It was that slow, heavy kind of sound that tells you something's wrong in a way that makes your gut twist. We stepped outside, and that's when I saw 2 deputies dragging a young man down the street. His face bloodied, shirt torn. I recognized him. Jerome, one of the boys who helped out at the church sometimes, not more than 17. He was yelling something about not doing it, about it being a setup. And then I saw Sheriff Broyle step out of the cruiser. He wasn't there to calm things down. He was grinning, laughing like it was all some kind of show. I didn't sleep that night, neither did Clarabelle. The next morning, we heard Jerome had resisted arrest and was found hanging in his jail cell. Just like that, I didn't believe it, not for a second. And neither did anyone else in our part of town, but no one said anything. You couldn't, not if you wanted to stay out of the ground. But Paulie, he asked questions. Why didn't anybody stop them, Papa? He asked me that night. Because stopping them would have meant trouble, I said. But if nobody stops them, they'll just keep doing it, right? That boy, always thinking, always too smart for his own safety. That week, I saw something change in him. He got quiet, thoughtful. Then one night, he slipped out of the house, didn't even wake us. They found him in the woods 2 days later. At first, they said it was a bear. Then they said it was an accident. Then they said he probably got lost and fell. But I knew. Clarabelle knew. I found his notebook under his bed a few days later. Inside were names, stories, witnesses, questions about Jerome, about the sheriff, about things he'd seen and heard. My boy had tried to expose the truth, and they silenced him for it. Clarabelle broke. She wasn't the same after that. How could she be? We buried our only child and got nothing back but a shrug from the law and cold looks from the ones who did it. I held her night after night as she cried into my shirt, and I kept my rage bottled up like poison in a jar. But I knew what had to be done. You see, grief will tear a man apart, but rage will stitch him back together in new ways. I started watching, listening. I played the fool. Fixed up Broyle's car twice that month, and both times he joked about how handy these colored hands can be. I smiled and nodded and made mental notes. I memorized his schedule, his habits, where he drank, who he drank with, and how much he trusted his own reflection. I was patient. Revenge, real revenge, don't come fast, it comes slow, it comes quiet. And it starts with understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. I wasn't gonna take a life. That'd be too easy. Too clean. No, I wanted to do to Broyle what he'd done to me. I wanted to make him watch everything fall apart. Bit by bit. Day by day. The first step was his reputation. So I started small. I passed out anonymous letters to the newspaper editor, filled with details I pulled from old files and conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear. I told stories, true ones, that only insiders would know. About how evidence went missing from the station, about bribes, about a case where a girl was assaulted and her attacker walked free because he was Broyle's nephew. The letters started getting printed. People started whispering, and I just kept on fixing cars like I always had. Clarabelle didn't know what I was doing at first. She just assumed I was drowning myself in work, trying to forget. But one night, when she found a stack of clippings in the shed with Broyle's face circled in red ink, she sat down beside me and just said, "Be careful." That was all, not stop, not don't, just be careful. That's when I knew she wanted it too. Not vengeance in blood, but justice in ruin, and I was going to give her that. Starting with the sheriff's legacy. Clarabelle didn't know what I was doing at first. She just assumed I was drowning myself in work, trying to forget. But one night, when she found a stack of clippings in the shed with Broyle's face circled in red ink, she sat down beside me and just said, "Be careful." That was all. Not stop, not don't. Just be careful. That's when I knew she wanted it too. Not vengeance in blood, but justice in ruin. And I was going to give her that, starting with the sheriff's legacy. I didn't sleep much those days. Not because of guilt, no, I'd made peace with the kind of man I had to become. I didn't sleep because I was planning. Every second I was awake, I was moving pieces around in my head. A lifetime of keeping my head down had taught me how to watch. Now it was my greatest weapon. After the articles hit the papers, the cracks started to show in Broyle's armor. The sheriff's office issued one of those dry, clipped statements. No comment on unsubstantiated rumors. But folks in town, even the ones who used to nod along with him at Sunday barbecues, they started pulling back. That kind of stain don't wash out easy. Still, it wasn't enough. He was rattled, sure, but he still had his badge. Still strutted around like the king of the county. I had to do more. There was a deputy named Hank Bloomer, young, sloppy, and stupid. I knew he was the weakest link in Broyle's chain. I'd seen him out behind a bar once, drunk and red-faced, bragging about roughing up that church kid like it was a hunting story. He didn't know I was listening, didn't even see me standing in the shadows. So I followed him, for weeks. I watched where he went, who he spoke to, how many bottles he tossed into his truck bed. And I made a plan. Something quiet. Something legal. One night I waited outside the bar until he stumbled out to his truck. I made sure my truck was idling right behind him. As he peeled off into the road, weaving like a snake, I waited just long enough and then followed. Half a mile down the highway, I called it in, anonymously. Gave them the license plate, the location, even described the truck. It was a clean arrest. Public intoxication, driving under the influence, loaded firearm in the glove box. Now here's the thing, under normal circumstances, Broyle would have swept that under the rug. But these weren't normal circumstances anymore. The press was sniffing around. People were watching. He couldn't just bury this one. Not without looking worse than he already did. Hank lost his badge that same week, and I made sure the papers knew why. But still I wasn't finished. Clarabelle, God bless her, had started to come alive again. There were moments, small ones, where I saw a flicker of the old light in her eyes. She'd come out to the porch with me, hand me tea, sit beside me in the rocker. She didn't ask what I'd done. Didn't need to. Then one evening, just after the sun dipped behind the pines, she said, "Ellis, do you remember that lawyer Paulie talked to in his notebook? The one he said might be on our side?" I nodded. His name was Jasper Linwood. Paulie had written about him, said he was young but honest, and that he'd been trying to dig into police records about abuse cases in our county. "He lives in Memphis now," she said. I wrote to him. That woman. That woman. While I was out there slowly dismantling Broyle's world, she was laying the groundwork for something bigger. Jasper drove down 3 days later. He sat with us in our kitchen, took notes, read Paulie's journal from cover to cover. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You want to bring this man down for good?" I didn't even blink. "Yes," he nodded. "Then we're going to need proof, court-worthy proof." I knew where to get it. See, back when I fixed up Broyle's cruiser, I noticed something strange. He had a small lockbox bolted to the underside of the passenger seat. Nothing too obvious, but I've been a mechanic long enough to know when something's not factory-made. I figured that's where he kept the stuff he didn't want seen. Notes, photos, maybe even cash. Men like him always think they're untouchable, so they get sloppy. So I paid a visit to the garage where the cruisers got their monthly tune-up. I had a friend there, Darryl, who owed me a few favors. I asked if he could stall the sheriff's car next time it came in. Loosen a wire, cut a line, nothing dangerous, just enough to keep it in the shop for a few hours. He agreed. And when that cruiser rolled in on a Tuesday morning, I was already there waiting with my toolkit. I got under that seat and found the box. Picked the lock. Inside were files, unofficial reports, notes written in Broyle's chicken scratch handwriting, and worst of all, photographs. Some of Jerome, some of other boys. Faces bruised, eyes swollen. He documented it like trophies. I didn't take anything. That would have been too obvious. But I had a miniature camera, one of those cheap ones you wind by hand. I snapped every page, every photo, every name. Then I put it all back the way it was and fixed the wire I'd cut earlier. That night, I handed the film to Jasper. He took one look and said, "This'll do." What followed was a slow, grinding process. Jasper filed reports with the state, backed by those photos, Paulie's journal, and statements from a few brave souls. Jasper tracked down people Broyle had wronged who were finally ready to speak. It took 6 months, but it worked. One full morning, 2 state police cruisers pulled into Jackson and marched right into the sheriff's department. When they came out, Broyle was in cuffs. The town went silent. It was the kind of silence you get before a thunderstorm, when the air is thick and everyone's holding their breath. I watched it all from my porch, Clarabelle's hand in mine. Now, here's the funny part. The sheriff didn't go down easy. He fought tooth and nail, claimed it was all lies, all a conspiracy. But it didn't matter. Jasper had built the case like a brick house. There was no crawling out of it. When the trial came, I was there every day. So was Clarabelle. We sat in the front row while they laid out the evidence. They read from Paulie's notebook in open court. Said his name, loud and clear, that boy. They finally saw what he'd done. Broyle sat there, mouth tight, eyes darting, and for the first time I saw fear in him. He was sentenced to 20 years. Not enough for what he did, but enough to make sure he'd never hurt another child again. After the verdict, people came up to us, shook our hands, thanked us. Some even apologized for staying silent all those years, and I didn't feel proud. Not exactly. I felt tired, but at peace. We drove home that night under a sky full of stars. Clarabelle rested her head against the window, and I remember thinking, Paulie, we did it. You weren't forgotten. Not for a second. I thought that would be the end of it. But I was wrong, because revenge doesn't always stop when justice is served. Sometimes the past has one last thing to say. I thought I was finished, thought the verdict would be the last word, the closing chapter, the end of a long, bitter fight. But life has a funny way of reminding you that justice isn't always a straight road. Sometimes it curves back on itself. Sometimes it drags old ghosts out of the ground when you least expect it. A few months after Sheriff Broyle was sentenced, Clarabelle got sick. Real sick. It came slow, fatigue, shortness of breath, a cough that didn't go away. The doctor called it cancer. Said it had been hiding in her lungs for years, quiet and patient, waiting for its moment. I remember sitting in that white-walled hospital room, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air, watching the woman I had fought so hard to protect now being fought by her own body. And I'll tell you something true. It broke me in a way even Paulie's death hadn't. Because this was the one thing I couldn't fight back against. No letters, no photos, no anonymous calls or courtroom speeches. This enemy didn't care how clever I was. But Clarabelle, she smiled through all of it. She'd run her fingers through my hair while I sat at her bedside and whisper, "You gave me peace, Ellis. You did what they said couldn't be done. I'm not afraid anymore." We had one last Christmas together, just the two of us. She made her famous cinnamon tea even though she could barely stand. We didn't need decorations or carols, just the quiet hum of memories between us. She passed away the following spring, and just like that, my world went quiet again. I buried her next to Paulie under a willow tree that bent low like it was listening. I sat there for hours just talking to them, telling them everything I'd done, everything I'd still do, and for a while I didn't do anything at all. Just existed. People in town treated me different now, called me Mr. Granger with a kind of respect I hadn't heard before. Some came by to drop off food, mow the lawn, fix things I didn't ask for. I appreciated it, but I didn't need help. Not anymore. I had one more thing to do. One more truth to uncover. It started when I received a letter, no return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. It read, "He wasn't working alone." That was all. No signature. Just that sentence, scrawled in a hand I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a prank, a bad joke, but something about it felt real. So I started digging again. This time, not for revenge, for truth. I went back through Paulie's journal, reread every note, every margin scribble. And I noticed something I'd missed before, an abbreviation beside a few names, CC. It was next to a judge's name, a county clerk, even one of the church elders. I remembered Paulie mentioning it once in passing, said he thought CC stood for clean circle. I didn't think much of it back then, but now I did. I pulled records, public ones, followed money trails, looked at land purchases, county contracts, who got hired, who got fired, and slowly a picture began to form. It wasn't just Broyle. There had been a network, a quiet one, of men in power who kept each other safe. Broyle was just the face, the enforcer. But behind him, there were others, men who smiled in public and burned crosses in secret. I had the names now, the real ones, and I knew what to do. This time, I didn't act alone. I went straight to Jasper. "You said you'd help me finish it," I told him, and to his credit, he didn't flinch. We met with a reporter from Atlanta, young, hungry, and not afraid of stirring up dust. She took our files, our statements, and over the next 6 weeks, she tore the lid off the whole rotten foundation. When her report went live, it spread like wildfire. There were protests, demands, investigations. 3 men resigned in disgrace, 2 were arrested, and 1, the judge, tried to run. But they caught him at the airport. And this time, I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. I'd done my part. I spent the next year living quiet again, fixing up old trucks, feeding the birds, visiting Clarabelle and Paulie every Sunday. I'd talk to them like they were still there. In many ways, they were. I get letters now, dozens every year, from kids, from parents, from strangers who say my story gave them courage. They call me brave. But I don't feel brave. I just did what had to be done. Because there's a kind of peace that only comes when you finish the story. Not just the first chapter, not just the courtroom victory, but the part where the truth lives in the open, where no one can pretend anymore. So here I am, an old man on a porch, rocking gently in the quiet evening breeze. And maybe to most folks, I'm just background noise. But I know better. Because long after I'm gone, someone's going to remember my name. Not because I was special, not because I was loud, but because I didn't forget. And I didn't forgive. I just made sure they couldn't bury us twice. That's all. That's the story. And now it's yours to carry.